malaria. Malaria was thought was from swamps and air. And you'll see this, some of the blame in the back of this first chapter on the plague. People thought it came from polluting waters and the bad, all that, and then it was a short jump to blame Jews and, other people for some of those aspects of sustenance. But, but in that introduction, he also talks a little bit about how we know what we know, but that's what we'll be expanding on throughout the course.
I was just curious. I know we can see how diseases develop, but is there any way you can look at a disease to see how I guess when or how will we know when they came about?
Let me go through these. Good question. I'll come right back to it. So we know these are some of the things. We know by historical documents and explorers' reports. Religious conversion folks, for example, in the New World, Catholic priests traveling over with the conquistadores wrote lots of accounts of the diseases that the indigenous people suffered from, primarily due to the exchange, sometimes called the Columbian exchange of diseases. Historical documents are benefited and are in your text here, on particularly the plague. It talks about that. But there are lots of wherever people went, they wrote, Hannibal the Great, Alexander, over the mountains with contacting people they had never seen before, wrote about what he saw, the different kind of people, how they were different from there. You got to remember that world was pretty small back in, early medieval times. Then art, often the depiction of art, from sculpture. We'll see more of this. This will be a little redundant when we get into the PowerPoints later on about bone diseases. But art forms, Japanese and Africans both depicted smallpox in a particular statue that they adored and venerated and that sort of thing. Although it didn't help any, but they offered various sacrifices to it, and that goes around the world. Those kinds of things.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that Native Americans also had, when they started to be infected, they started to use their art form to them.
We got woodcuts. And some of that showed up, particularly in South America. On art form, some of the smallpox, particularly. We'll talk a little bit more when we get to this in a little time. Smallpox is one of the second things that we'll be looking at. The next thing about what we know and draw information from, of course, to a huge extent, is skeletal data and teeth. Now, I'll answer a little bit of what Joe's got to say. Skeleton, teeth, mummies, and DNA analysis give us a pretty good triangulation of important dates. Sometimes the historical documents, too, they write about when, these things were seen, and they describe some of the early physicians in Greece and Egypt and in India, and some of the older things in China. Some of their older physicians describe in detail what the symptoms were and the signs of different things in medicine. So you get some of that is actually pinpointed down to years. But again, various kind of dating systems that I don't have time to go into, but radioactivity decreases the kinds of carbon.
Carbon dating.
There's three kinds of carbon. We'll talk a little bit about that as forms of isotopes later on. There's carbon-12, 13 and 14. 14 is radioactive, 12 and 13 isn't. So the radioactive one, from the time it exchanged with oxygen, that individual, whatever animal, critter, died, no longer took in that exchange, and so you had a decay rate that is very well known and double-checked with lots of other kinds of ways of getting absolute dates as how accurate that is, and then allowances are made for atmospheric carbon and that sort of thing. But, pardon?
14 is radioactive.
14 is normally the radioactive form. Yep. That wouldn't be anything I'd ever ask you, but if you want to put it down, that's fine. But I'm saying even if we go back to the authoritarian guy here and get quizzes, that would not be anything I'd ask you, those kind of nuance. So that's what an interesting kind of thing in terms of really getting some dates. Mummies,
You're fine, you're fine.
of course, mummies are the other absolute thing. They're often wrapped. Oh, look at the Egyptian stuff, all the papyrus, they're all dated, who is what, when, and we understand how to do those dates now and make conversions. The other thing about mummies is that stuff can be snipped,
Yeah.
tiny particles, and run through particle accelerators, and so we, as archaeologists and bioarchaeology, which really is the field that I'm kind of driving in the last 2-3 weeks here, we leech off all the other hard sciences, physics, chemistry, and utilize them and often work with them. And often the specialists, we just send specimens in and we know how we're supposed to collect them, not to contaminate them and all that. But the other sciences do that kind of business for us. There are a few bioarchaeologists that also have, joint PhDs in geology and do actually, part of their dissertation was to run a big machine that counts the atoms. Mummies, of course, can be frozen. We have many things cropping out of gold miners found in Alaska. They're washing out with powerful and coming right out of the deep silt on river erosions and gold, when they start, whoa, that's too big to be a cow from that wandered away and it's too deep in the ground. Turns out to be mammoth. I have a good dear friend who dug a site called the Mammoth Site